Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, and I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Today's show will take us outside central Canada to get a perspective on both Eastern and Western Canada. In order to do so, we've invited as a guest Dr. Marco Navarro-Génie. He is president of the Haultain Research Institute and a senior fellow with the Frontier Centre of Public Policy. Formerly, he was president of the Atlantic Institute for Market Studies. Marco, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on. Can you give us a sense of what issues are facing Eastern and Western Canada at this point?
Well, it seems to me that these are two regions that are kind of peripheral to the center of the country. And normally, around times of elections, people hardly pay attention, largely because they vote significantly as a bloc, and usually they pick one gang and they stick with it, which of course has the peril of being taken for granted more or less at each round. But what is interesting in an election like this, when things are so close, is that they actually matter. That small variations in a region can produce an extra couple of seats or maybe less seats. And therefore, we are seeing already a tremendous interest in the leaders of this campaign, of these parties, coming to the regions. As an example, I right now live out west. I used to live in the Maritimes not very long ago. But in the previous election, the Prime Minister hardly ever showed up to Calgary. In the last one, he showed up to Calgary at the very last minute for 20 minutes and off he went. And he's already been here a couple of times. And I think that shows to what degree the importance of these peripheral regions is being taken serious.
And of course, Aaron O'Toole has appeared in Atlantic Canada, despite having only 4 seats in the region right now. So same kind of thing. They're trying to go to places where they intend to pick up seats, yes?
Yes. I think that is correct. Atlantic Canada, as you know, has been painted completely red in 2015. Things changed slightly a little bit in the last election in 2019, and today there are 4 or 5 seats at play that, you know, in a very, very close race could make a slight difference. The same goes for British Columbia. The British Columbians are, I think, more varied voters than in the rest of the country in many respects. And there are maybe half a dozen to 8 or 9 seats that are at play that could seriously change the outcome of an election if things are that close.
Now, speaking of Atlantic Canada, and then I guess I'm looking at Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba in particular, they've chosen and you mentioned this, they've chosen very different paths. They've made very different choices in the elections, one blue, one red. So how do you account for that?
Yes, this is one of the things that also makes them similar in the sense that I think if you look at proportionately, Atlantic Canada can be said to be the home of the Liberal Party, or the Liberal Party has a strong home in Atlantic Canada. In the rest of the prairies, it's a little bit more of a mix, in spite of the fact that the lion's share of the MPs in the western part of the country are blue, as you say, they're conservative. But proportionately speaking, the greatest number of seats in the Green Party are in the West. Proportionally speaking, the greatest number of NDP seats are in the West, and of course, the Conservatives. So it's a little bit more of a mixed bag as opposed to the monotonality of the Atlantic.
Yeah, and do you see the NDP making a breakthrough at all?
If we look at the numbers today, in the last election, the NDP garnered some 16% of the vote. And they are the one party right now that is increasing its share of the vote most rapidly. The Liberals seem to have stalled. The Conservatives have gained a little bit, but the greatest leap has been the gain in the NDP, and they're not gaining very much in Atlantic Canada. A great deal of that gain of the NDP is in Ontario, but mostly in British Columbia at the time, where they are threatening the Liberals in more than a few seats as well. So this, of course, as you might appreciate, has the potential of putting a dent in some of the fortunes of the Liberal Party.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, with a special East and West edition. We're speaking with Dr. Marco Navarro-Génie. He is president of the Haultain Research Institute. Dr. Genie, obviously you had a point that I had to cut you off. Maybe finish that point, and I've got another set of questions for you.
Yeah, I think the tail end of that message is simply that the growth of the NDP works disproportionately to the detriment of the Liberal Party than to the Conservatives.
Yeah, no, and that's everybody's watching that the so-called progressive vote. The Liberal Party has been very efficient at vacuuming up those votes in 2015 and 2019 at the expense of the NDP. Whether that remains to be the case this time, I guess we'll all know after Election Day. I want to sort of dig down, though, in some of the things that are driving the votes, I suppose, and driving the issues that are important to these particular regions. And let me just ask initially about the COVID pandemic. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has affected every single region of the country, but let's talk about Eastern Canada and Western Canada. How has the pandemic affected those particular regions differently?
I think these regions are culturally very different, and you can see it in the response to the pandemic. We saw, for example, and it goes up and down, that in Atlantic Canada, in general, the four provinces rallied together and formed a kind of a sub-region, opened up the borders within, as though this is a virtue that borders in Canada should remain open, but kept the rest of the country outside. So it's kind of a garrison mentality in that sense, whereas out west, what you saw was a significant tilt towards greater opening and a desire to keep open however one could. And this has been, in many ways, a bit of a thorn or a difficulty for premiers in Saskatchewan and in Alberta in particular, because they haven't been able to please everyone. And as you know, in politics, when you don't please everybody, you also displease a great many people. And hence, somebody like Jason Kenney today has one of the lowest approval rates as premiers in the country, in spite of the fact that many would argue he has done a pretty significantly good job.
Yeah, so and that's a case of the political culture, I guess. In Atlantic Canada, maybe they're used to seeing things from their own regional perspective. It wasn't a big issue to leave the rest of Canada out, as you put it. Whereas there is a diversity of opinion, certainly in Alberta and British Columbia, on these issues, right?
Yes, and it has had an impact on their economy. Atlantic Canada isn't an economy that can sustain itself closed in. I mean, we saw numbers very, very recently in terms of the contraction of exports and in the recent economic report from Statistics Canada. And the contraction of the economy, of course, in economies that are export oriented, like the Atlantic, has made a significant dent on their potential for growth. And of course, that also has an implication on the potential to attract more people, which has been a significant problem in Atlantic Canada. Conversely, here in the West, the struggles are very similar in terms of exports. And the population has been more stable. There's greater growth in population in the West. But Alberta has a cycle of boom and bust, right, to put a plug on your show, and the populations have been more inclined to leave when things are bad and more inclined to migrate in when things are good.
Can we talk a little bit about oil and gas and how that creates sort of some policy preferences that are important in this election?
Absolutely. It's difficult to talk about the West, especially Saskatchewan and Alberta, without talking about oil and gas. the oil and gas industry here has been besieged by what I call a sort of a confluence of three different problems. One is, of course, the instability and often the slump of oil prices in the international markets. The second one, of course, has been that by and large, Alberta's and Saskatchewan's oil has been trapped by policy from Ottawa largely, but from Quebec and from British Columbia as well, who do not want pipelines, desire to continue to export oil through the territories. And of course, the third in the trifecta is the collapse of the economy by the COVID policies. And so right now, the oil patch continues to hurt significantly, and this has ripples to the rest of the economy in the country.
And we're back here at Boom and Bust. As usual, I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Marco Navarro-Génie, president of the Haultain Research Institute. Dr. Navarro-Génie, just staying with oil and gas for just one more extra moment. Obviously, there's been a policy shift and I guess a consumer shift away from oil and gas, and Alberta and Saskatchewan kind of grappling with that. It has its impact on environmental policies in the election, climate change policies, the view of the carbon tax. Give us your sense of how that region is coping with this shift.
By and large, in the region, and especially here in Alberta, which is the largest oil-producing province in the country, we take exception of the dichotomy that you cannot have reasonable economic development in oil and gas and a sound stewardship of the economy. We would like to see, and most Albertans and Westerners would like to see, a balanced policy where one is not pitted against the other. We seem to have the sense that in central Canada, the message is completely different, and the Prime Minister has very much adopted this line of thinking that the only way to fix the environmental problems in the world, let alone in Canada, is to shut down the oil sands. And Albertans and of course people in Saskatchewan who also share the oil sands take significant exception to that kind of thinking.
So it does obviously color how they view the political parties in the election.
Absolutely, and this has a net effect of seeing Alberta and Saskatchewan, by and large, except for one seat between the two provinces, that is not a conservative province. Maybe out of significant love for the Conservative Party, but by and large, out of a significant rejection of the policies on the environment that the Liberal Party has put forward.
Let's talk about the attitude and feelings towards Confederation itself. Obviously, this has been a sub-theme in Alberta with the Maverick Party, but I'd love to get your point of view from both an Atlantic Canada as well as a Western Canada aspect, how there are shifting attitudes towards the Federation itself.
This is one of the things that, in a way, connects both regions as well. There is a significant level of resentment to some extent, and sometimes it's quiet, and sometimes it's not so quiet. Sometimes it's beneath the surface, and sometimes boils over in both regions. That being said, in Atlantic Canada is considerably tame by relation to that in the West. In Alberta and in Saskatchewan, there is a significant growth in the desire for more autonomy, and in fact, in some quarters, for greater independence for the region and for the provinces in particular. Some people would like the whole Western Canada, and hence the Wexit movement, get out of the country. It's become crystallized in this new party that is a kind of Bloc Québécois of the West. I hate the comparison, but it's to people who don't know much about it. It sort of drives the understanding by the analogy. So it would be a kind of autonomous party from the West, but whose representatives would sit in Ottawa. The reason being that there is a significant consensus among these people that Alberta and Saskatchewan need stronger voices in Ottawa.
And from just maybe from Atlantic Canada's perspective, is there a feeling of disenchantment at all?
There is some, but Atlantic Canadians, one would say, are a lot more pragmatic in their discontent. And so for a little while, they thought that the best way to deal with the discontent was to channel their energies towards the Liberal Party, and that's where they have been. They seem to have taken quite a bit for granted right after the party won the election. For example, the main example would be that they tried to take away their already entrenched traditional right to have one judge in the Supreme Court from Atlantic Canada.
Right.
And as soon as that happened, people mobilized, and there was a significant amount of push from Atlantic Canada. So the party is less likely to take it for granted now than they were before.
And I'm sure time will tell. We'll be back with our guest, Dr. Marco Navarro-Génie, president of the Haultain Research Institute, a senior fellow as well. And we'll continue our discussion on East and West in this country. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dr. Marco Navarro-Génie. Dr. Navarro-Génie, wondered, it strikes me that in both Atlantic Canada and Western Canada, there's a whole bunch of new emerging industries, startups, technologies, getting into the tech sector in both parts of our country there. And I'm just wondering whether you've started to notice any impacts, either social or cultural or political, as a result of these emerging technologies and businesses?
Again, excellent question. It is one of the other themes that joins the two regions. They are at heart resource-driven industries. And precisely because they are resource-driven industries, there has been an enormous desire to diversify and to look at other sources of economic growth. In the West, of course, we forget the great success of the oil sands was started by this desire to diversify. The amount of technology that has come out of the oil sands is enormous. But the newer sort of tech industry in Alberta, there are more and more of these sort of companies, gamers, and programmers and such coming to Edmonton and to Calgary. There is a tremendously well-organized corridor between the two cities at the moment. And while I was in Atlantic Canada, I also saw a significant amount of growth and a desire for even more in the tech sector. They haven't had the tremendous impact that they could have. These things take time, but their presence is already being felt. They're attracting significant amount of investment, and their potential for economic growth in the future is quite large.
Mm-hmm. So given just our whole discussion here, and given what you know, obviously one of the desires in a country like Canada is to try to accumulate as much consensus as possible. As we've seen during this election campaign, there's a lot of things pulling our country apart right now. But do you see ways to get more consensus from those and within those regions that are diametrically opposed in their political choices, it appears, to make sure that the country can be run better and can have better results? Unfortunately,
we haven't lived up, and I say we generously, to the slogan that variety is our strength in some quarters, which is rather the opposite. The slogan gets thrown around, but there has been a desire to impose almost a single political and socioeconomic view across the country. I think the real strength of this country is to unleash the limitless near potential of its people in its different regions to do the things that they want to do and to do them best. That is certainly true in Atlantic Canada. that is certainly true within Atlantic Canada, and it's also true out here in the West. So I think we need to take a greater care of enabling the regional strengths of the Federation rather than to try to fit everyone in the same mold.
And are you optimistic that that can happen?
I am less optimistic on the current stewardship in Ottawa, let's just say. This sort of wokeness about life and economy and everything in the world, this idea that economies can grow out of one's heart is so silly. I think we need more adult and more mature people to be looking after the Federation.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you for joining us today. Very interesting presentation. And obviously, I know you'll be watching the election results very closely, as we all will, because really, we've got a lot of issues in this country. And so now is the time to get some resolution on at least some of them anyway. So thank you for being on our program. I'd love to have you back at some point, but best wishes until then.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have been here.
Thank you. Would like to thank Dr. Navarro-Génie once again. Very interesting, just to get away from Central Canada a little bit, talk about Atlantic Canada, talk about Western Canada. Very different political cultures there, very different political results in general elections, but also some commonalities in terms of some of the challenges they face and some of the opportunities they face in the new economy as well. So certainly something to look at in the future as well, but probably will have bearing on the election results on September 20th. Thanks for watching.